So I'm just going to share with you a little bit about the fight or flight response. So we get a bit of an understanding how some of the movements, some of the practices that we're sharing here will benefit you in regulating your nervous system and regulating your fight or flight response. One thing we're going to take a look at is this abdominal area here. When we take the outer layers of muscles away, we take away some of the more superficial abdominal muscles, we get to some deeper layers here, deeper layers of muscle, and we start to uncover some of the deep layers like the transverse abdominis, which is a muscle that sits around in the deepest layer of the abdomen. And as we take that away, we become aware of some of these very deep muscles here. The first thing we're going to look at is underneath, and you can see here underneath the diaphragm muscle. Now, the diaphragm muscle, if we have a look here, is this muscle, that dome-like muscle that sits underneath the rib cage. And this is one of the this is the predominant muscle for breathing. And this is the muscle we want to use when we're breathing. We also use some of these intercostal muscles. This muscle is also a muscle that responds to the fight or flight response. Together with these muscles here, which are the hip flexor muscles either side. And these muscles attach close to the spine, close to the ribs, up to this area here. So the fight or flight muscles, the hip flexors, are part of the fight or flight muscles. We have a look at the back of the body. So if we take a look at it from the back of the body, the hip flexors attach all the way to the back of the body. So from the front all the way to the back of the body here, attaching to these vertebrae, attaching right up here. Now, if we have a look, you'll see here are the adrenal glands. So you can see how closely associated the adrenal glands are to the hip flexors. So we have the adrenal glands, the hip flexors, and the diaphragm, all a big part of the fight or flight response. What happens is when we have that initial fight or flight response, adrenal glands will kick in, the diaphragm will contract, the hip flexors will contract, and all of this area tightens so that we either pull into ourselves into a fright, freeze position, or we pull up our knees and hip flexors to run. The diaphragm tightening like this too will mean that we create a more shallow breath, which will increase our heart rate as well. So all these things are a way to stimulate the system to respond in an alert and active way so that we can run, we can fight, or we can flight. So what we want is this response to be minimized when the initial need is over. If we do need to run, if we do get that initial fright, once that initial moment is over, we want this response to dissipate. We want the adrenal glands to stop producing adrenaline. We want the diaphragm to relax. We want to return to deep, relaxed breathing. We want the hip flexors to relax. So it's a very vital part of understanding the fight or flight response. Now let's take a look at the nervous system response. When we get into a sympathetic response, which would be relating more to the fight or flight response, we get a response in the body, responses such as dilating pupils, limiting saliva production, dilating the airways, heart rate increase, inhibiting the stomach digestion, releasing more glucose, inhibiting digestion, releasing adrenaline, releasing bladder control, and also decrease in the blood flow to the reproductive system. All of that makes sense. In a fight or flight response, we want to minimize that response to those areas. We don't need to be digesting at that time, obviously not procreating at that time either. It's also a time where the dilation of the pupils and the dilation of the airways and heart rate increase, all of these things really means that we are able to be more alert. Our machinery has gone into high gear, which is an amazing thing. It's absolutely phenomenal that our system is able to do that in times of need. When we then recover and relax, and we want to be in this sort of more parasympathetic state a bit more of the time, we want to utilize the sympathetic in certain times. However, the parasympathetic is the rest and restore, where we recover. So the pupils constrict a little bit. We don't need to be so vigilant. We get back into saliva production. The airways constrict a little bit. The heart rate slows down. We come back into digestion. The stomach and the intestines start to digest again, which they don't, and there's not so much in the sympathetic. The bladder constricts, which is also very handy. We don't have to go to the toilet all the time. And obviously, it's a time to procreate when we're in a relaxed and safe state. So when the system knows that we are in a relaxed and safe state. So when we are in stress and when the stress is ongoing, obviously we don't get the opportunity to digest food properly, to go back into that restoration state. And the system soon goes out of balance because we can't stay in that sympathetic response long term. So it's very important to utilize some of these tools to regularly bring your state back, especially in times of crisis, times of chaos, times of high stress. It's really important to apply some of these tools so that you offer your body the opportunity to restore and rest.